Imagine sitting on 100 thumbtacks. If you were to remove 99% of those thumbtacks, are you pain free? And the answer is no, because there's still one thumbtack poking into you, right? And that made me really think about, okay, how important it is to make sure we're identifying these triggers and removing them to clean up that terrain. So first and foremost, I start off by
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emmie Brown, here with Melissa Gentile. Today we're diving deep with Dr. Pedi Mirdamadi. As a 2012 world champion pro fitness model runner-up with an educational foundation that spans psychology, kinesiology, and naturopathic medicine, Dr. Pedi brings a wealth of knowledge and an integrative approach to healthcare. Dr. Pedi is a licensed naturopathic doctor and a registered holistic nutritionist and an Institute of Functional Medicine certified practitioner. Dr. Pedi has also enriched his expertise under the mentorship of renowned cardiologist Dr. Mimi Guarneri, focusing on integrating cardiology with naturopathic medicine. This unique training has equipped him with a distinctive approach to cardiovascular health, emphasizing preventive strategies and holistic patient care. He's passionately focused on empowering individuals through better digestive health, hormonal balance, and cardiovascular wellness. If you're eager to learn how to optimize your gut health naturally, stay tuned as we explore the latest insights with Dr. Pedi. Dr. Pedi, thank you so much for being here. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the warm welcome.
Of course. Yes, our pleasure. So before we get into gut health, I want to know a little bit about your background as a competitive fitness model, and I wonder if this has maybe inspired your path down the naturopathic medicine route. And I would just love to know, how did you even learn about naturopathic medicine, and how did it relate to your background as a competitive fitness model?
Sure. It's honestly been a very organic journey for me. Starting at a very young age, I was always fascinated about the topic of peak health. So in my early teens and late teens, I started, working out because exercise, physical activity was what it meant to become healthy. And in my early 20s, I started getting more and more in depth into weight training, resistance training. And at the time, somebody was doing local competitions, fitness competitions, and they told me that I'd be great fit for doing those because I was so already active with my lifestyle and my fitness regimen. So I was open to that idea, and I attended a couple of their shows, and what I saw on stage was fascinating to me. I saw these well-shaped, fit individuals. And to me, that's what I thought the definition of health was: to have chiseled abs, ripped pecs. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what it means to be healthy. And so I took a deeper dive into the fitness competitions. And for 4 or 5 years, I competed at a very high level, got my pro card, competed in the pro division in the
Oh, wow.
2012 World Championships, where I got second in the world out of about 60 pros all
Amazing.
over the world. And so I thought that's what it meant to be healthy. But what I realized during my journey was that it was the farthest thing from health, actually. Those that
Yeah.
were doing these extreme competitions, getting the body weight down to 2.5%, which I remember was the lowest I got it down to, it was not healthy. And at the time, I was doing my master's of science in kinesiology. And I remember I had to walk from one side of the campus to the other because I was a teacher's assistant for some of these classes. And I had my lunchbox, and I had to keep putting it down and like catch my breath because my body fat was so low. I hadn't had carbs in like 8 to 12 weeks. So,
Wow.
energy levels are really low. And so I realized, okay, this is not healthy at all. And I had a mentor at the time who was trained under um, one of the world renowned functional medicine practitioners. And he took me under his wing, and he kind of taught me about what functional medicine is and really opened up my eyes to this whole world of functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, which ultimately are root cause medicine with more natural, holistic approaches.
right away, Dr. Petty. It's so inspiring. And thank you for really giving us a glimpse into your background. And you're obviously extremely well rounded. And today we're going to be talking about gut health. So I'm curious, anything in particular that inspired you to focus on digestive health in particular before we jump into that?
Nothing in particular, but just overall understanding how incredibly important gut health and digestive health
Yeah.
is for all other aspects of health, right? Because when we think about gut health, we just think, oh, you eat food, you absorb the nutrients, and that's it. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Our gut health is connected to so many areas of our overall health. It's connected to our brain health, how we think, how we feel. It's connected to our immune system. It's connected to our detoxification, our liver health, our hormone health. It's connected to our skin health. So the more I went through naturopathic medical school and my studies and realized how truly profound the impact of gut health is for overall health, I realized, okay, this is one of the main pillars that I need to work on as a naturopathic doctor. And, a lot of times we look at food in terms of only calories, right? Calories in, calories out. And I spent 2 years of my life in an obesity and exercise physiology lab studying the trends of caloric intake, carbohydrate intake on obesity. And we were just focusing on food as just numbers, right? But food is information for the
Yeah.
body. And
So much more than that. Yeah.
it's so much more than that, right? And that's what has been really fascinating for me to understand, because the food we eat can either promote inflammation or reduce inflammation in the body. The food we eat can either move the bacteria in our gut towards a state of balance or towards a state of imbalance, also known as dysbiosis. The food we eat could turn on our genes or turn on disease genes or turn off disease genes. That's an area of studies known as nutrigenomics, the effects of nutrition on our genetic expression. So the food we eat is so much more than calories. It's truly information for the body, and it's all with its interaction with the gut. And that's why I really keep gut health in the forefront of my mind when it really comes to treating any patient.
And when you take in new clients, I mean, I don't know exactly what your clientele looks like in terms of gender, age, their experience in this world here. But I mean, how do you start to teach that? Because I can imagine you're probably getting patients in for the first time. This is the first time they're hearing about this. And they're like, what do you mean?
Absolutely. So, a lot of times even patients will come in and they don't have much digestive issues going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they might have like skin issues or migraines or focus issues. And so slowly, one of the things that we do as naturopathic doctors is docere, which means doctor is teacher. And that's why our appointments are usually an hour and a half for an initial visit, right? Because there's a lot of education that we need to provide for our patients. And the more we educate them, the more likely they are to, create those lifestyle changes, create those nutrition changes. So it's all about educating them on those connections. And what happens is, when patients clean up their diet, like let's say person's intolerant or sensitive to gluten, dairy, you tell them, hey, back off, back off. They might be a little, hesitant about doing that, but they'll do it. And then they'll come back sometimes and they'll be like, you know what? Last weekend I had the gluten that I've been avoiding, and oh boy, like it really messed me up. Like I
It's
can't
that
believe
re-exposure. Yeah.
exactly
It's
that
a big teacher.
re-exposure. It's a big, oh wow moment for them. It's a really good learning experience that, okay, foods do impact how I feel, right? And then, sometimes I simply contextualize it for them. And I'm like, look, we eat 3 meals a day on average. That's about 1,000 pounds of food a year if you do the math. And that is a lot of food and information the body has to process. And so we need to look at food as more than just caloric intake. And when you kind of connect the dots for them, how it impacts your immune system, your skin, your focus, your energy, your hormones, then they slowly start understanding those connections and buying into, okay, I do need to take care of my health and support my health, gut health.
I'm sure just as much as it's a learning experience for your patients, I'm sure you're learning all the time through your case study load, Dr. Petty. I'm curious, to set the stage, would you mind sharing one of your most challenging gut health cases and what you learned from that?
Um, one patient that I had that was really remarkable for me is this gentleman came to see me with really bad migraines and really bad allergies. And when we sat down and spoke, he had no gut issues, which was really surprising to me. He was having normal bowel movements, well-shaped bowel movements, no bloating, no gas, no heartburn, no gut symptoms really. And so, I started working on the allergy picture, giving him some like natural antihistamines, removing some of those inflammatory foods, optimizing his vitamin D, giving him some anti-inflammatories for his migraine, some butterbur, feverfew, those things that could magnesium, those common things that we could think of, getting him to sleep better, minimize his stress, all of those things. And then it wasn't getting better. The migraines and allergies weren't getting better. And I told him, I'm like, I think we need to do a stool test and just look at what's going on in your gut. And he was a little resistant at first, but after we did the stool test, we found out there was a party going on in his gut. He had H. pylori, a lot of
Oh, wow.
bacteria that was overgrown, significant inflammation. So at that point, I was like, look, a lot of your challenges from the allergies and migraines could be coming from the gut. And when the gut is overworked, the liver can get overworked, and through the liver, that can contribute to migraines. And so I told him, I'm like, let's put together a 3-4 month gut protocol, address this gut piece, and see what happens with the allergies and migraines. And what happened was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Migraines got so much better. The frequency and intensity of the migraines really reduced dramatically. The allergies were well managed. He didn't need to take his allergy meds anymore. And so that was a really fascinating experience for me, because he wasn't having like overt gut symptoms, but they were manifesting elsewhere in his body. And it took some time for me to make that connection and to really see that and to get him to buy in and to do that stool test, because the stool test could be pricey for some patients. So, you want to make sure it's needed. And so I wanted to make sure that, okay, I'm going to get enough information out of this that it will be helpful for him to buy that test. And so it was, thankfully, but it took some time. There was challenges in terms of getting him to buy in that it's my gut that I need to work on. But once he saw the data, he was a very data-driven guy. And, some of these tests, they like have bolded or red results, and that caught his attention. He's like, I don't like seeing the red there. I'm all about data. What do I got to do so that these are normal? And when do I repeat the test? So he bought it. And once the patient bought it and they saw those key data points that I connected to his symptoms, from there, it all made sense to him. And he was on board to initiating and executing the gut health protocol that we put into place.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes patients need like that black and white information on a piece of paper in front of them. And it's not just kind of like their doctor's opinion anymore. It's like, okay, here's the red zone. Like, we got to do something about this. Just from our experience with talking with practitioners that specialize in this area, do you ever see a perfect gut microbiome test?
Very rare. A perfect, very rare. But actually, the patient I have at 11 o'clock was one of the best ones I've seen. No bacteria that was,
Wow.
no opportunistic bacteria that was out of balance, no H. pylori, no pathogens, no calprotectin, zonulin. It's very rare. I've probably in the last 2 years run 200 of those tests, and maybe I don't think I've ever seen a completely normal one, to be honest.
I need their diet. I need their protocol. I need to know what they're doing to kind of take care of that.
Yeah. And some of us are just more resilient. Like our guts
Mhm.
are just more resilient. So there's that piece. Nutritionally, as kids, we ate better. And remember, like there's early, like from the way we're born, if we're C-section or a vaginal delivery for breastfed, bottle fed, like stressors as a kid, antibiotic load as a kid, all of those things kind of set us up of how vulnerable our gut is at a later age and our state of nervous system. So it's truly, being holistic in what it takes to sustain and maintain a healthy gut ecosystem.
I want to know, Dr. Petty, before we move on from the case, did you do any food sensitivity testing with this gentleman? Because I tend to think about food sensitivities in many cases as a consequence of poor digestion, leaky gut, dysbiosis, right? So I'm wondering, and of course it's individualized, we're saying that all the time, but what's your take on food sensitivity testing? And did you run
It's,
it for
it's
that?
a little bit of a
That one?
gray area, right, Dr.
Yeah.
Brown? It's a little bit of a controversial area. the thought is that if someone's got leaky gut, then food sensitivity testing is no longer accurate because everything is just getting through the immune system, seeing everything. So it's no longer accurate at that point. But if there isn't any leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, it can be helpful. The area that I feel like it has been helpful for me is, a patient comes in, they have really bad diet choices. They're eating like bread, bagels all day and loading up on cheese and the sugar, the processed foods. They're eating like that. And I like Melissa said, I could tell them my opinion and say, hey, you might want to back off on these foods. But when they see the objective data on the paper that, oh, look, I'm lighting up like a Christmas tree for dairy,
Right.
then they're more likely to buy in. So sometimes it can be helpful running that test, and when they don't have leaky gut, so it's more accurate, to get them to buy into the nutrition changes. So I feel like at that point, it could be very, very helpful. But also, it's really helpful in personalizing a nutrition plan for patients, right? So I like to use them to personalize my nutrition plans for patients, because just getting them to understand that, look, a diet that works for you may not work for me, right? And what was happening to me, Dr. Brown, to answer your question, is back in the day, about 7, 8 years ago, every morning I was having chocolate whey protein with a banana, almond milk, almond butter, and I was having gut issues. And my gut issues were so bad that it actually had caused inflammation in my throat. And I kind of lost my voice for a bit, and I developed like vocal polyps, right? And I went to the ENT. ENT's like, oh, we got to do surgery and remove those polyps. And the reason why I didn't proceed with the surgery was because he said, you can't work out for 3 months. And then I was like, forget it.
You're like, I can't do that.
work
Yeah.
out.
It's off the table.
Non-negotiable.
Right.
Yeah. So that was, I'm out of here. And then so I started reevaluating, okay, what's going on? What am I putting in my gut, in my stomach, that's maybe coming up and affecting my throat and promoting inflammation? And so when I did that test, I was reacting to almonds. So the almond milk and almond butter I was reacting to. I was reacting to bananas. I was reacting to chocolate and whey. So everything that I was putting into that protein shake, thinking fueling my muscles and my cells, was actually not agreeing with my immune system. So I made a very simple switch from chocolate whey protein to vanilla plant protein, switched from almond milk to coconut milk, switched from almond butter to cashew butter. And I felt so much better. And slowly the inflammation went down and my voice started to get better. My stomach felt better. Bowel movements looked better. Bloating and gas got better. And slowly the gut healed itself. And so I think there are instances where it can be very, very helpful, but not always, like I mentioned.
Just real quick, rotating certain non-dairy milks, Dr. Pedi, because you mentioned switching from almond to coconut. But then if you're switching to coconut every day, just like you were doing almond every day, in your experience, do you see that could just as much maybe contribute to a sensitivity eventually?
Absolutely, right? So when the body sees the same proteins over and over again, especially those more allergen type ones like the nuts, the coconuts, and dairy, things like that, it could develop a sensitivity and an intolerance to them for sure. So I think, to echo what you said, rotating is the most effective way of making sure our immune system doesn't become sensitive to something because it's seeing the same proteins over and over again.
And Dr. Pedi, you mentioned the nervous system in its relationship to gut health. So I feel like I see a lot of times in cases, people do a lot of kind of physical things to help improve their gut health, but they're not addressing nervous system dysregulation. They're not addressing their stress. And what's kind of the gut's influence on just like mood and mental health in general? Like I want to get into the vagus nerve as well. So take what you want from that.
Yeah, so obviously, the vagus nerve is a connection between the gut and the brain, right? But what's fascinating is that we actually have more bacterial DNA in our gut than we have human DNA in our body, right? So most of our body is actually bacteria. And so a lot of people think that the gut is actually the second brain, right? Because of this communication between the gut and the brain, the gut-brain axis through the vagus nerve. So the impact that the microbiome has on our nervous system through the vagus nerve is huge. But also our gut is where we absorb, key nutrients and vitamins that are cofactors for the production of neurotransmitters. And a lot of the neurotransmitters that we talk about that influence mood are actually produced in the gut, like serotonin. Most of it's made in the gut. And so that's why ensuring a healthy gut state is very, very important for our mood. But also, we got to look at the flip side, right? If our nervous system is dysregulated, we're in a constant state of stress, that's definitely going to affect our gut. We all have heard of fight or flight, right? And the nervous system, the central nervous system, is always running on a spectrum between fight or flight and rest and digest. And unfortunately, because of all the day-to-day stressors of this modern day world, a lot of us are stuck in fight or flight. And that's not how our nervous system was designed to be. The nervous system was designed in a way that if a tiger attacks us, we want to put all of our resources into our heart, into our lungs, so we could flee from that tiger. When a tiger attacks us, that's not a time for us to worry about digesting food. But unfortunately, a lot of us nowadays, even me myself, I'm guilty of it. We're kind of stuck in fight or flight because we're always go, 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 go. And so when we're in that state, our digestive system doesn't need to function, so it shuts down. And when we eat in that state, it's actually very detrimental because we don't have proper digestive enzyme capacity, stomach acid, vagal tone. We don't have the right, supporting materials to properly digest and absorb the food. And if we eat in that state, we're more likely to experience uncomfortable symptoms of gas, bloating. And that's why I think it's very, very important before eating to spend a couple of minutes grounding ourselves, taking a few breaths, relaxing, maybe putting your feet on the earth, whatever it takes to just kind of calm the nervous system. And now it's gotten to a point for me, if I feel like I'm ramped up still in that state of fight or flight, I won't even eat. I'll wait another half an hour and I'll check in with myself and be like, okay, do I feel like I've kind of calmed down a little bit? And then I'll eat. Because eating in that state, for me, it just doesn't work. I experience uncomfortable digestive symptoms. And, this is another beautiful thing about prayer. We've been praying for centuries, and prayer before food has that ability to pull your body away from that state of fight or flight and towards parasympathetic activation and more rest and digest. Just taking a few minutes to give thanks for the food, give thanks to whatever your beliefs are. Just that has a lot of power in kind of getting that nervous system under control.
From what I understand, it kind of affects how you're able to absorb the food as well. I think there's a science behind that with the structure of water absorbing our intentions and just really getting into that kind of lower stress state before we go in and eat. Because I think so many of us, just in the world we live in, we're used to, eating in the car, eating at our desk, eating in front of a screen, not even breathing, we're trying to eat and drink at the same time, which is a whole other thing. But yeah.
I saw somebody the other day driving while watching a video on his phone and eating a sandwich.
Oh my God.
Like,
that's the state that we're in right now.
It's worst multitasking. You're risking yourself of getting into an accident, and then you're not even digesting your food. Mm-hmm. It's like, what is going on here? I couldn't.
Just chaos. That looks like chaos to me. I have to say before we move on, one tip I think another guest we had on mentioned, before eating, turning on a song that just taps into that joy you feel when you hear it. Something maybe from childhood, it has some nostalgia, and I just loved that. So whether it's prayer or a song or deep breathing, I wanted to throw that out there because I think it's worth repeating. And it's easy, Absolutely. Right? Just pop on a song on your phone, and if that gets you into a different headspace and it's more parasympathetic, that's fantastic.
And especially if you could hum along with it, right, Dr. Brown? Humming is another great way to stimulate that vagus nerve, so you're getting a double whammy there.
Perfect. We're just layering on the tips here to optimize. That's totally. Such a great point. Love it.
I prefer singing in the shower for vagus nerve stimulation. It's the best one.
That's also a good one, a classic. I want to know, Dr. Pedi, as a former fitness model, when I started prepping for this, I thought, well, he's going to really know how to approach gut health from a metabolic standpoint. I mean, more than most because of your background. And when you spoke to us at the beginning of this interview, you spoke to the extremes of it and really how unwell you felt at that time. So I imagine you had to learn how to strike a balance to support metabolism, optimize body composition, and support gut health all along the way. So what advice can you give about how to optimize gut health for optimal metabolic health?
So I think it's very important to figure out what works for you, right? Like I said, I was eating all of those protein rich foods, whey protein
Mm.
that I thought was good for my muscles, but it wasn't actually agreeing for me. So it was figuring out what works for me and how much food works for me before I would eat way too much protein, not nearly enough carbohydrates. There was times where I would go 12 weeks on a keto diet, zero carbs. All I would eat was eggs and peanut butter or protein and vegetables for 12 weeks, nonstop, doing
Wow.
cardio intensely twice a day, lifting weights once a day. And so now I realize how detrimental that was for me. And so figuring out what works for me and creating a fine line. Don't get me wrong, that extreme dieting made me so in love with eating. Now when I eat the things that I love, like, a healthy burger or something with a little bit of gluten-free noodles, or even some potatoes with something on top of it. Like I love it so much. So the extreme dieting made me really appreciate and love eating so much. So that was a beautiful thing that came about it. But now I'm more about the 80-20 rule, right? 80% I try to keep it tight, follow like the things that work for me. And then if you do it right, 80%, that gives you a little bit of buffer space to get away with some of the things that you enjoy that maybe won't be the best for you. So that 20%, you get to enjoy your life a little bit. So for me was figuring out that fine balance that, okay, I got to keep it right 80% of the time. And then a little bit more carbs are okay. But at the same time, I need to figure out what works for my gut and for my body. So that's how I was able to adapt it a little bit. So it wasn't as strict. I got to enjoy my life, but I was also eating the things that agreed with me.
So that's really striking the balance and going through that journey. And I'm sure you're helping people do that all the time. So, and I'm sure they're coming in with a diagnosis of IBS all the time, also. I'm just a wild guess. And
Mm.
so I'm wondering, I want to transition to lab testing, Dr. Petty. So, what kind of patterns are you seeing with microbiome markers, digestion, inflammatory markers for, say, IBS? And, how do you then maybe dig a bit deeper to say what's behind that IBS, considering those lab results?
Right. So, based on my understanding, IBS is kind of like a wastebasket term. It's just like you can't really figure out why someone's gut is pissed off, and then you just call it IBS. And
Yeah.
it usually manifests in people that eat right away, and they eat right away and they have to run to the bathroom, and that could be problematic because we don't want to eat and have to go to the bathroom right away. We want to sit at the table, go to a restaurant, not worry about that. So it could affect quality of life. And I actually had a lady that did a discovery call with me, and it was really sweet and cute. And she said that I saw your videos and I had an intuition that you could be the one to help me.
Oh.
I've been intending to travel to see my son overseas for the last 5 years, but I can't because of my IBS, and I feel like you can help me. So she drove 3 hours to come to the office and to see me. And I just did my standard workup, right? She was a lovely lady in her 50s, but she was very stressed and anxious. And that is, I think, a risk factor for IBS, because when the nervous system is dysregulated, the gut is uneasy, right? The gut isn't in a state where it could digest and absorb, it just wants to spit the food out in a way. And so she was very stressed and nervous. So right away, I'm like, okay, we got to work on this nervous system. We got to balance your nervous system a little bit because you seem like you're stuck in fight or flight. So let's work on that and let's do a stool test. So I did that, and then I did a stool test on her, and she definitely had some overgrowth of some of the opportunistic organisms. She definitely had poor elastase, so that was one marker that was low, which is a marker of enzymatic production from the pancreas. And a lot of times, if we're stuck in a state of stress because our stomach acid gets suppressed, the signaling from the stomach to the pancreas can get affected, so we won't have as much enzyme production. And if we don't have adequate enzyme production, if we eat, it's not going to get digested well. It might contribute to loose stools. So that's one marker that I noticed was off for her. Her elastase was low. She had the opportunistic bacteria, which was overgrown. And she had some changes, some deficiencies in the beneficial bacteria in her gut. And that was more likely due to her poor diet. She wasn't eating enough fiber, not enough diversity in her fruits and vegetables. She was eating more processed foods, and that was manifesting in her beneficial bacteria count in the microbiome section of the stool test. So between working on the overgrowth of the bacteria that we observed, of the opportunistic bacteria, giving her some enzyme support, but at the same time supporting her nervous system to balance her nervous system, it was incredible how well she felt. And she was telling me that her family members didn't believe her about the improvements that she had seen in just
Oh.
2 visits, right? In just 2 visits. And so, that's just a perfect example of when a patient's subjective report of their experiences and their challenges align with the objective report of what the data says, and then from there, just treating the data, balancing the nervous system, working on those foundational steps, and it just resulted in great success in this person in just 2 visits, which was amazing.
And I know to ask too, when you're doing an initial consult, you're doing a lab workup, you're doing the gut test, and you get those results back. Obviously, every patient's protocol is going to look a little bit different because people are going to have different markers that come back differently. But do you have a general approach, or do you like to do different phases with gut health protocols? Like, what do you see working? Are there certain antimicrobials that you're really enjoying? Kind of where do you start?
Absolutely. So when I did my functional medicine training, we were very big on the 4R protocol. And that was the framework that allowed me to simplify my approach. So anytime I feel overwhelmed or complicated with a gut health patient, I always go back to that framework. And the framework is very stepwise. So the 4R protocol is simply, the first R is remove. We have to remove things that are pissing off the gut, for lack of better words. And what do we need to remove? Things like food allergies, food sensitivities, but also any parasites, bacteria, opportunistic organisms that are overgrown. So very important to identify these and remove them. And that's the first step. And if we don't do this first step right, the rest of the 3 R's that are remaining, they won't work as well, right? And so I actually had a discussion about this with one of my mentors in functional medicine, and he gave me a really good analogy that stuck to me. He's like, it's so important to identify and remove those triggers, the first R. And the analogy he used was, imagine sitting on 100 thumbtacks. If you were to remove 99% of those thumbtacks, are you pain free? And the answer is no, because there's still one thumbtack poking into you, right? And so that made me really think about, okay, how important it is to make sure we're identifying these triggers and removing them to clean up that terrain. So first and foremost, I start off by giving general recommendations on the foods that they should avoid. And that usually for me is processed sugars. I'm not talking about fruits or honey, things like that. I'm talking about the packaged processed sugars, white sugar, things like that. Gluten containing foods, often dairy, and for some people, nuts and eggs. So I tell people to back off on those foods right from the start to kind of clean up that terrain until the data rolls in, until I get their food sensitivity test, until I get their gut health test, which will give me further data as to understand, okay, what are the foods that are triggers for this individual? And is there any bacteria or parasites or pathogens that are present and overgrown that we need to address? So that's the first R. And then the second R is replacing things that are missing. And things that are missing could be stomach acid, enzymes, bile. So if any of those are missing, it's going to result in digestive issues. So we want to replace some of those. If we identify low stomach acid or low digestive enzyme capacity, digestive enzymes, or bitters. Bitter herbs are just a category of herbs that stimulate the body's own production of stomach acid and enzymes. Those could be really, really helpful for patients that have had their gallbladder removed. Making sure we're supporting bile flow, making sure we're supporting bile is very, very important to allow for the absorption of fats and the breakdown of fats. And so that's the second R. And then the third R is repair. What do we have to repair? The gut lining. we identify any inflammation at the gut level, and that's identified usually as elevated secretory IgA or calprotectin or zonulin, or if we identify leaky gut with zonulin, we have to go ahead and treat that gut lining. And how do we treat the gut lining? First thing we got to do is the first R, remove those things and then replace those things. So it's like a systematic approach. And so a lot of times I will use supplements that could be really helpful for healing the gut lining, things that have glutamine, aloe vera, DGL, even bone broth, things like that could be very, very helpful. Antioxidants that work at the gut level. So those could be very, very helpful in healing that gut lining. And then the last R is re-inoculate, right? And that means adding in bacteria that could be missing or deficient. And so making sure that microbiome is dialed in and has what it needs to optimally support digestion. So that's kind of my overall framework that I use when it comes to simplifying gut health approach, because it can be very overwhelming. But I think this framework that the IFM has kind of provided has been very, very helpful for me. And when I explain this to patients, it makes sense for them. It's like, this is why we're doing the antimicrobials, like the oil of oregano, the berberine, the black walnut, whatever it may be that we're using. We're going to use that for your first phase to remove these things. The enzymes are supporting your second phase, the replaced phase. And so when they see that framework, they kind of understand, okay, that's why I'm taking this supplement. When it makes sense, it helps with compliance and adherence and patient success.
We do want to jump into SIBO a little bit as well, just because we know SIBO can be one of those more challenging things to diagnose and to treat. So how do you approach that?
SIBO is a tough one for sure. I
It's
see a
tough on
lot of
symptomology wise too. It's tough as well. Even just trying to get to the root of that and just kind of what patients are going through when they do have that.
Yeah, that's a good point that you make. This symptomology is a little confusing because some people could be constipated, some people could have loose stools, some people have gas, some people don't have gas, some people have bloating, some people don't have bloating. So it's kind of vague and hard to figure out. But I can pick up clues on whether or not the person can have SIBO without testing based on what they're eating, how they're feeling, right? If someone tells me, oh, they can't eat fruits, they can't eat rice, those sugary foods, they can't eat, they get belching, they get bloating, they have a lot of stress going on, they have a history of acid blocker use, antibiotic use, those things to me make it think like, okay, maybe SIBO might be present here, because one of the risk factors for SIBO is low stomach acid, right? The stomach acid in our stomach is there for a reason, because it actually kills off some of the bacteria that we're swallowing through our mouth that's coming in through the food. And so if we don't have good stomach acid, we're not actually killing off some of that bacteria. And if we don't have stomach acid, we're not properly breaking up the food, and undigested food sitting around in the small intestine. It creates a breeding ground, a feeding frenzy for these bacteria. Undigested food particles, these guys are going to just eat, eat, eat. And then when they eat, they're going to literally fart out gas. Excuse me for the lack of better words. That's what they're doing. They're eating the fibrous foods and they're literally farting out gas. And that's manifesting as gas and bloating in the person. And so we want to be mindful of these risk factors to see, okay, have they been extremely stressed for the last few years? Have they been on acid blockers? What does that look like for them? And so being mindful of those things is very, very helpful. But at the end of the day, testing is the ultimate answer when it comes to SIBO, right? So I'll do SIBO breath testing on patients that I suspect can have SIBO, because that will allow us to identify if they have SIBO, and if so, is it hydrogen or methane dominant or both, because that's going to impact their symptoms differently. That's going to impact the treatment course differently. And so the testing is definitely very helpful, because again, it gets the patient to buy in, because SIBO treatment is tough because of the diet, right? The SIBO diet is challenging. It's a very low carbohydrate diet. It's called a low FODMAP diet. It's a medicinal therapeutic diet. That's not something that should be done long term. It's just short term to starve out the bacteria while the antimicrobials or antibiotics do the killing. So we got to pull their food and attack them with the antimicrobials or antibiotics. So it's a two-part process, and it doesn't work without skipping the diet, which is the challenging part. But when you do the testing and patients see, oh, wow, look at all of this gas, this explains why I feel gassy, then they buy in and they're more likely to comply with the diets.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think when patients see that on the test, it really kind of helps them adhere to certain protocols and see the same vision that you're seeing, as the practitioner. But I know we are coming up on the hour here, Dr. Pedi, and I just want to thank you so much for your time, for coming on the show today, sharing all of your knowledge and sharing a little bit about your story. It was so good just to kind of get a little bit of your background, where you came from, how you evolved into this practice that you're in now. And we definitely feel your passion. That definitely resonates for us. So if anyone listening and tuning in today wants to connect with you, maybe they want to be a patient of yours, maybe they just want to learn more about you, where can we find you online?
Sure. So our practice is located in Encinitas, California. It's called Oasis Health and Medicine. We have a team of great doctors here that address anything from gut health to integrative cardiology, mental health, hormones, all of the above. So if you're in the local San Diego area, Oasis Health and Medicine is our practice, but we do service patients all over the state of California. So you don't have to be local. You could still be in Northern California, work with us. That's no problem. And then for those that are online that are interested in learning more about what I talk about, and I do make a lot of content on this, my Instagram at Dr. Pedi, DRPEDI, Natural Health is my handle. And I post a lot of videos there sharing what I'm passionate about and just trying to create a ripple effect in this world, because technology has advanced so much. AI is replacing the jobs of so many people, but we're still so confused about health, about food, and the impact that food has on our gut and our overall health. So sharing this information really brings me joy.
I love it. And we'll be sure to link these down below for you guys, so you can find Dr. Pedi online and connect with him on social. He's got some great content out there. I've personally been a follower for quite some time now. And again, thank you so much, for Dr. Pedi, for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And until next time, I'm wishing us all vibrant health and wellness.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Have an excellent day.
Of course.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.